Hi guys, so I'm going to show you how to set up a headless WordPress instance and run that on Azure Static Web Apps. Now, if you're familiar with WordPress, you know that it is a content management system. And now a content management system is basically an online system that allows you to bring together things like images and videos and text and put them together into a theme. And then WordPress manages all that content for you so that you can generate a web page that your visitors can come to and get information or read your blog or whatever you might be using it for. So before we get into how this actually works for creating a WordPress site that can be hosted on Azure Static Web Apps, it's important to understand the difference between a monolithic CMS and a headless CMS. Now, WordPress is a monolithic CMS. Now, most monolithic CMSs have three tiers to them, like we see here. There's the front end tier, and this is the web browser that is going to be running on a user's device. So this would be the user experience where you log into the admin panel for WordPress or you visit the site and the visitor then sees whatever is served up by the backend server. Now, this right here is generated by this piece right here. This is the middleware or the application tier. The application tier has a lot of different components. It has a web server, it has some kind of scripting language, then it has the app itself, and then it also has some content associated with that. Now, all of that combined is what generates the web pages that get served up to the browser. And then behind that is a database. And the database will have oftentimes things like settings and some of the content. So this is where like the users would be stored. And some of the content, especially in WordPress, is stored in the database as well. So the combination of all three of these things create the app that we call WordPress. And if you were to remove any one of these, the app wouldn't really work very well. So if the web browser crashes, you can't really log in. If the web server fails, then you're not going to be able to get the content for the website served up. You won't be able to log into the admin panel or anything like that. If the database becomes unavailable, you won't be able to log in. WordPress won't be able to generate the pages it needs to serve up to the browser. So that's why this is called a monolithic application, because everything in the stack basically creates a monolith such that if anything fails in the entire stack, the whole thing fails. Now, besides the brittle nature of a monolithic application, it doesn't scale well either. To scale this, you basically have to replicate the database. You have to replicate the content in the CMS layer in the application tier. You have to make sure that WordPress is running on multiple servers and then that all of the content is replicated across those same servers. And to make that happen requires a lot of complex infrastructure that can be very expensive, sometimes even cost prohibitive to many people that are using WordPress. So to address these problems, some folks try to think of ways that they could try to get away from this monolithic approach and basically allow the site to be served up without the need for the complicated backend services needed to generate the site. And so that's where the idea of a headless CMS was born. Basically, what that allows us to do is take the output from the CMS and draw a line right here. And then we can take this output as just basically static files. That's just basically text files and graphics files and video files that themselves are not dynamically generated. And then we can put these on servers all over the world through a content delivery network or some other means. And then the visitors can go to the website. They will get the content without the need to touch the backend services and the backend databases to make that run. And so this approach allows me to build a website that is not coupled to the backend services and that I can also scale easily across the globe to create a high volume, highly available website. Now, another big advantage of doing a headless CMS is basically cost. So if I can build a website without having to replicate an expensive server or an expensive database, then that allows me to have just a small instance of the CMS and a small instance of the database running without the need for creating a lot of replicated servers and databases to serve up a lot of requests. I can simply remove the head from this and serve that content and maintain a smaller backend footprint. And sometimes you can maintain it offline. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. So the first thing that we need to do is get a local instance of WordPress. So what you can do with WordPress is you can actually run it on your laptop or on your desktop computer. So you basically install WordPress locally and then you log on to WordPress, but it's running on your laptop instead of a web server online or something like that. And once you log on to that instance of WordPress, you can then edit pages, you can create blog posts, you can upload pictures, upload videos, whatever it is that you're going to be doing. in your local environment on WordPress. So once I have everything like I like it, I can take that content and I can export it to a local folder on my computer. And that folder is just going to contain static files. It's kind of HTML files and images and videos and all the other associated files that would go with the website, but it doesn't need WordPress to host those. Now it's just a bunch of static files, and I can host those practically anywhere at that point. So once my static content is where I want it to be, I can then use GitHub Desktop to publish this to a GitHub repository. And then once I publish this to a GitHub repository, this is then going to trigger a GitHub action that is automatically going to take the same content and post it over to an Azure Static Web App. And once you're on an Azure Static Web App, then your site is going to be running on some kind of online environment. Now, you could publish the same content to any other kind of static host that you want to. You could use GitHub Pages or some other static hosting, but I'm using GitHub to publish to Azure Static Web Apps in this instance because I just love Azure. There's a couple pieces of software that we'll need to install. Now, the first one is LocalWP, or just simply called Local. And what this allows us to do is run WordPress in a local context. So this is pretty straightforward right here. So just you can create an account and sign up for WP Engine. WP Engine is a great place to host full-fledged WordPress sites if you want to do that. Or you can download it for free. You just simply provide it with some information and then get it. And this will download an executable that you can then install on your system. Now it works with Linux or Mac or Windows. Either one of those will work. And then we'll also need GitHub Desktop. So you can download this for your environment as well and install that application. And you'll need a GitHub account too to make this work as well. But once you have those installed, then we can start creating our website and then hooking that up to GitHub and then putting that over into the Azure Static Web App. So once you install LocalWP, you're going to launch LocalWP, and it's going to look something like this on the start screen. Now, if you don't have any sites created, you'll see this screen. If you do, you'll see a list of your websites. I'm going to create a new site here. And I'm going to create a new site just using the wizard they have here. So create a new site and click continue. And I'm going to call it Blaze WP Headless or something like that. And under advanced options, you can see the local site domain and the output right here. So I'm going to put this into a folder that I can find very easily. So I'm going to put it out here and say maybe my documents folder. I'm going to create a new folder right here, and let's just call it WP for good measure. And then I'm going to hit select this folder, and this is where I'm going to write the site to. And this is also the local name of the website. So Blaze WP Headless is the name of the website. So click continue, and then you can go to a custom environment right here. I prefer to create a custom because the preferred one I've had problems with, but in any case, I'm going to use PHP 8, Apache, and then I'm going to use MariaDB. Now, it defaults to Nginx. I've just had some issues with that, so I'm going to use Apache on this particular context here. And then I'm going to click continue, and then I'm going to give it a login name and password for my login for WordPress. And you can have advanced options right here if you want to make a multi-site WordPress, which I'm not doing. So I'm basically just going to click add site, and this is going to run some scripts and create this website. Once everything is created, you just go to admin dashboard, and this is going to take you over to the admin site for WordPress. So it's the very familiar login for this particular login screen. So you can punch in that username and password that you supplied when you created the website, and that's going to take you to the dashboard for WordPress. And this is very familiar if you've used WordPress for any length of time. So this is where you can administer the website. And this is the experience that you would get if you're running it headless or if you're running it as a monolithic CMS. So what I want to do to make this work is install a plugin. So I'm going to go to add new right here. And I'm just going to install a simple plugin called Static. Simply Static is what it's called. And Simply Static just basically exports the site. So this is a plugin that allows me to export the site once I am satisfied with whatever it might be. So install the plugin, and then it's going to install and activate it. And this is going to allow me to run this website using this headless instance of it by exporting this content. So I'm going to come down here to Simply Static, and I'm going to go over here to settings. Now, in the settings box here, this is where we're going to change our settings for Simply Static to export this content. So I want to basically export the content to a local directory. And the directory I want to put this in is going to be that same one that I had a minute ago. So I'm going to go over to documents right here. And then I'm going to go over to my WordPress instance right here. And this is where it installed the app, the configuration and logs. I'm going to create another one called static right here. And that's where I'm going to export my content. Now I'm going to copy and paste this into this block right here. And I'm going to change the backslashes to forward slashes because I'm using Windows, and this is more oriented around a Linux context. PHP likes the Linux context or the Mac context better, but it'll still work if you use forward slashes. So I'm going to click Save Changes. Now, this is going to save the changes. Now, just to make sure everything works, click on Diagnostics to make sure that you can write to that folder. If you can't write to that folder, then something is up. So this should be okay right here. If you get this error right here, that's okay. You don't need that. That can be a fail, but this one right here especially needs to be the one that's okay. Because if it can't write to this folder right here, then it won't be able to output the files. So once you have this, the next thing to do is actually generate the content. So under Simply Static, you can then click Generate Static Files. And this process will take a few minutes to run depending on the size of the website, but it's basically just going to go through the website and then export all the content as HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and images, and whatever kind of content that you might have on your website. Now, when it finishes, you should see something that looks like this. If it doesn't update after a while, what you probably want to do is reload the page and make sure that everything is up and working. But you should see some output that looks something like this. And it's going to give you a bunch of different file outputs that it generated. So then we can browse to that folder that we created. And this is what we're going to get. Now, the folder layout looks pretty much the exact same as we saw with our WordPress site. If you were to log into this, you would still see the PHP content and so on. And this one has WP login.php. We don't need that. But the magic is all in these folders right here with this index.html as being the root page for this particular website. And this is what we're going to put into GitHub. So once you've got that content created, we're going to use GitHub Desktop. So I've opened this up here, and I'm just going to create a new repository on my hard drive. Now, we'll want to basically give this a name. So we're going to call it static like this. And it's just give it a description, lays a static site or something like that. And we're going to choose the local path that is one level up from our site right here, because it's going to add the repository underneath this root right here. So we're going to use WP as the local path, and then we're going to call it static, and that's going to be the name of the repository under that. And so once I have this right here, I'm going to click Create Repository. Now, what this is going to do is automatically commit all of the files that are in that particular folder to the repository automatically, just as an initial commit. So if you click on history, you can see that it added all of the static content that was the output from our local WP. So once we have this done, we can push the repository. And so we're going to push it to github.com. So we're going to go click sign in, and we're going to continue with browser. And then this one will allow us to create a new repository right here. So I'm going to call it static right here. And that's fine. And I'm going to choose my own no organization right here. And then I'm going to click push repository. And this is going to actually upload this to the GitHub instance that I have already created. I've already created a user. If you don't have a user, you will have to create one of those. But once everything is up there, now anytime I make changes, I can make them in my local WP and then export them again. So on GitHub, you can go over to your repositories, and you should be able to see the static site that you just created. And mine, it's defaulted to a private repository. And there you can see that I've got several changes inside of this folder here. Now, this isn't currently published. This is just in the staging area for the website to wire this up to Azure Static Web Apps. But once I wire this up to Azure Static Web Apps, anytime I make a change to this, it will automatically publish it over to Azure Static Web Apps. So once you get everything wired up between your local context and GitHub, now all we have to do is create an Azure Static Web Apps. This is a once and done type thing, so you never really have to do this again once you're done. So what you can do is just type in static web app in the Azure portal, and this will take you to the marketplace where you can select static web app right here and then click create. And this will walk you through a wizard for creating a static web app on Azure. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to choose my subscription. I'm going to create a resource group, call it static. I just call it, what do I want to call this? Call it Blaze WP Headless or something like that. And click OK. And I'm going to give it a name for my static web app. I call it Blaze WP Headless inside of that, just for good measure. And you can use the free tier if you're using this for a hobby project or a personal project, which in this case it would be, since this is more of a demo. And you can pick an Azure region for the APIs. But Azure Static Web Apps is actually a global resource in Azure, meaning that it's not bound to a region. So once you publish your app to Azure Static Web Apps, it's distributed globally through Azure Web Apps, basically like a CDN works, basically. So your app gets copied to a server somewhere in Europe so that when European visitors visit your website, they're going to hit a local copy rather than having to traverse the ocean to get to a host in the United States or something like that. So it just makes it a little bit better of an experience for your visitors. And all this is free, so you don't have to worry about using any kind of credit card to pay for Azure Static Web Apps on Azure. So the deployment environment, we're going to be using GitHub. So if you haven't used GitHub before and wire that up to your Azure subscriptions, you'll need to do that. You'll hit a change account or add account here, and that's going to basically allow you to choose GitHub. And then it's going to ask you to associate this with Azure Static Web Apps, and you can do that very easily with this. But once you have it set up for GitHub, you'll have the ability to choose an organization, a repository, and a branch. So I'm going to choose my user. My repository is called static. So if I type in static, that's the one I'm going to use right here. And my branch is main, since I only have one branch on this. You can create other branches if you so choose. Now for my build details, I'm going to use custom right here. You can build any number of different kinds of websites using Azure Static Web Apps, using the GitHub Actions integrations that it will provide for this. So if you're using Angular or Next.js or one of these other front ends or one of these static site generators like Gatsby, Hugo, or ViewPress, all of these will work just fine. But I'm going to be using custom here. And custom is basically the ability to set the custom application and the output. So it's not going to actually build anything. It's just going to look for static HTML content in this context. And then we're going to click next for tags. And then we're going to click review and create. And once that is done, we're going to click create. And then that's going to basically take my resource, create it. And then in the process of creating this, it's actually going to pull the content from my GitHub repository over to this web page. So let's go over to the resource and check this out. So here is the Azure Static Web App resource that's already been created. Now, this has got a lot of things that you can customize about it. Now, most of this you can ignore if you're just working with a static web app. So you don't really need to worry about a database. That's more for apps that are using the API feature on this. So most of this other stuff isn't important. What is important is probably a custom domain if you wanted to make this like a blog site or some other kind of website that you wanted to have your vanity domain with it. So blaze.net that I'm running uses Azure Static Web Apps, and I registered a custom domain for my website. But you can also use this URL right here for testing or just to see what it looks like. So let's go ahead and launch this right here. And you can see that this is the static web app running, generated by WordPress. So all that output I basically uploaded into this Azure Static Web App instance, and now it's running in that context. But I want to make a change to this. So I'm going to walk you through that process. Let's set up a new theme for this and then publish those changes and see if we can make that go through the same workflow, but then trigger the publication automatically once I push this all up to GitHub. So let's install a new theme just for good measure here. Let's go over to appearances and go to themes, and let's just choose one of the defaults. I think they have one here. Let's use this one right here. Let's activate this theme called 2022. And this is the one that will show up now. And so let's publish this now that I've changed the theme. And let's go back over here to generate on Simply Static. And let's generate some static files here and let that process run. And then when that's done, we're going to go over to GitHub Desktop to publish these out. Now that that has published that new content, let's go back over to GitHub Desktop. And let's just make sure that we fetch origin right here. And we can see that we have some changes and some new files that is created right here. So let's go ahead and say new theme for our comment here. And then I'm going to commit to main and then do a pull. That's going to force me to do a pull on my origin. Then I'm going to do a push origin right here. And then that's going to then commit everything up to my GitHub repository. Now, because I created that Azure Static Web App and connected it to my GitHub repository, these changes should be reflected on my Azure Static Web App in a few minutes. So here's the website. Let's refresh this to make sure that everything is updated. So now you can see that I've published a new theme right here on this particular website. So this is just an approach for running WordPress as a headless CMS. So you can use the WordPress experience if you like that. It's a user-friendly experience. You don't have to have any knowledge of coding. You don't have to have any knowledge of GitHub to make that work. You don't have to have any knowledge of anything on Azure really to make that work. You just kind of work through the configuration screens and use all of these graphical tools to basically manage your website. And so you can manage it in a local context and then publish it through the GitHub desktop client. And then once it's there, everything just gets pushed out to Azure Static Web Apps and it's up and running. So this is a great approach for folks that aren't coders, or if you are a coder and you just like to use WordPress but don't want to pay for a dedicated WordPress environment, or you don't want to manage it, this is a great way to approach that kind of problem. So again, just a way to host a website. If you like this, please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video and share it with your friends. I'm always interested in feedback on this, so please drop some comments in the comments section down below, and I look forward to seeing you on future videos. If you like this content, please consider subscribing to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button. You can also like this content by clicking on the thumbs up, or share this content with your friends, and also comment in the comment section down below. You can also find me online at www.blaze.net or on Twitter at @theonemule. And as always, thanks for watching.